Karen, I can't do this anymore. I want a normal life. Those words shattered 20 years of marriage. I stood in our kitchen, still wearing the scrubs from my overnight shift at the hospital, watching my husband pack his suitcase while our 20-year-old daughter Emma slept peacefully in her wheelchair in the living room. Emma had been born with cerebral palsy and required round-the-clock care. For 2 decades, I had been her primary caregiver while working as a nurse to support our family. I had sacrificed career advancement, social life, and personal dreams to ensure Emma had the best possible life. "What about Emma?" I whispered. "She's your responsibility now," he said without looking at me. "I've given enough. I deserve happiness." He walked out that morning to start his new life with a woman who had no children, no complications, no disabled daughter requiring constant care. If you've ever sacrificed everything for your family only to be abandoned when it became inconvenient, stay with me. When Emma was born 20 years ago, the doctors delivered the devastating news with clinical detachment. Your daughter has severe cerebral palsy. She'll never walk, likely never speak clearly, and will require lifelong care. Many couples don't survive this kind of challenge. Mark and I held each other in that sterile hospital room and made a promise. We would face this together. We would give Emma the best life possible, and we would never give up on our family. For the first few years, Mark kept that promise. He learned to help with Emma's physical therapy, took turns with night feedings through her feeding tube, and even researched the best schools and programs for children with disabilities. We were a team, united in our determination to give our daughter every opportunity to thrive. But as the years passed and the reality of Emma's needs became clear, Mark began to change. The romantic dinner stopped because we couldn't find babysitters who could handle Emma's complex medical needs. The weekend getaways ended because Emma's equipment and medications made travel complicated. The spontaneous moments of intimacy disappeared because Emma often needed care during the night. I threw myself into learning everything I could about cerebral palsy, becoming an expert in physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and medical care. I went back to school to become a registered nurse, thinking the medical knowledge would help me care for Emma better while also providing financial stability for our family. Mark supported my education initially, proud of my dedication, and impressed by my determination. "You're amazing," he would tell me. "I don't know how you do it all." But somewhere along the way, his admiration turned to resentment. As I became more competent and confident in managing Emma's care, Mark began to feel unnecessary, pushed aside by the intensity of my focus on our daughter's needs. "You care more about Emma than you do about me," he accused during one of our increasingly frequent arguments. "That's not true," I protested. "I love you both, but Emma needs us, Mark. She depends on us for everything." "And what about what I need?" he demanded. "What about what we need as a couple?" I tried to balance everyone's needs, but there were only so many hours in the day, only so much energy in my body. Between working 12-hour shifts at the hospital and caring for Emma around the clock, I was exhausted most of the time. I knew Mark felt neglected, but I didn't know how to give him more without giving Emma less. The first crack in our marriage appeared when Emma was 10 years old. Mark started working late more often, going out with colleagues for drinks, taking weekend trips with friends that didn't include Emma and I. When I questioned him about it, he became defensive. "I need some normalcy in my life," he said. "I need to remember what it feels like to be around people who can have normal conversations, who don't need constant care." His words stung, but I tried to understand. Caring for Emma was challenging, and everyone needed breaks. I encouraged him to take time for himself, hoping that some space would help him appreciate what we had built together. Instead, the space seemed to show him what he was missing. Mark began talking about other families we knew, families with typical children who could go on vacations, attend social events, and live what he called normal lives. He started questioning whether we had made the right choices, whether we were sacrificing too much for Emma's care. Look at the Johnsons, he would say. Their kids are in college now, and they're traveling the world. They're living their dreams. Emma is our dream, I would remind him. She's our daughter, and she's brought so much joy to our lives. Has she? He asked one day, and the question hung in the air like a poison cloud. I was shocked by his doubt, by his apparent regret about the daughter we had both loved and cared for. Emma might not be able to walk or speak clearly, but she was intelligent, funny, and affectionate. She had taught us about unconditional love, about finding joy in small victories, about the strength of the human spirit. But Mark seemed to see only the limitations, the sacrifices, the ways that Emma's needs had shaped and constrained our lives. The second major crack appeared when Emma turned 15. She had been accepted into a specialized program at a residential facility that could provide excellent care while teaching her independent living skills. The program was expensive, but it would give Emma opportunities we couldn't provide at home. I was excited about the possibility, seeing it as a chance for Emma to grow and develop new skills. Mark saw it as an opportunity for us to reclaim our lives. We could travel, he said. We could go out to dinner without worrying about finding a caregiver. We could be a normal couple again. We could visit Emma every weekend, I added, and she'd be home for holidays and summers. But when the time came to make the decision, I couldn't do it. Emma was thriving at home, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. The residential program was excellent, but it wasn't family. I couldn't bear the thought of sending her away, of missing the daily moments that made up our life together. Mark was furious with my decision. "You're choosing Emma over us," he accused. "You're choosing her over our marriage." "I'm choosing our family," I replied, "all of us, together." But Mark had already made his choice. He began withdrawing emotionally, becoming a stranger in his own home. He stopped participating in Emma's care, stopped attending her therapy appointments, stopped celebrating her small victories and milestones. The final betrayal came gradually, then all at once. Mark started spending more time away from home, claiming work obligations that seemed to multiply weekly. He became secretive about his phone calls and text messages. He started paying more attention to his appearance, buying new clothes and working out at the gym. When I confronted him about his behavior, he denied that anything was wrong. "I'm just trying to take better care of myself," he said. "Is that a crime?" But I knew something had changed fundamentally. The man who had once promised to face Emma's challenges with me had become someone who saw those challenges as obstacles to his happiness rather than opportunities to grow stronger together. The truth came out on a cold February morning when Mark's phone rang while he was in the shower. Without thinking, I answered it, expecting it to be work or a family member. "Good morning, handsome," a woman's voice purred. "Are you ready for our weekend getaway?" My hands shook as I hung up the phone. When Mark emerged from the bathroom, I confronted him with what I had heard. "It's not what you think," he said, but his face told a different story. "Then what is it?" I demanded. He sat down heavily, unable to meet my eyes. "Her name is Jessica. She's a colleague. We've been seeing each other." "For how long?" 6 months, he admitted. 6 months. While I had been working double shifts to pay for Emma's equipment and therapies, while I had been caring for our daughter around the clock, while I had been trying to hold our family together, Mark had been building a relationship with another woman. "Why?" I whispered. "Because she makes me feel normal," he said. "She makes me feel like the man I used to be before everything became about Emma's needs. She doesn't know about Emma, and when I'm with her, I can pretend that part of my life doesn't exist." The words hit me like physical blows. He was ashamed of Emma, ashamed of the life we had built together, ashamed of the woman I had become in service to our family. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I want a divorce," he said. "I want to start over with someone who can give me a normal life." That night, as Mark slept peacefully beside me for what would be the last time, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had happened. The man I had loved for over 20 years, the father of my disabled daughter, was abandoning us for a woman who represented everything we were not: carefree, unencumbered, normal. I thought about Emma sleeping in her room down the hall, unaware that her father was about to disappear from her life. I thought about the promises we had made in that hospital room 20 years ago, the vows we had taken to love and support each other through sickness and health, for better or worse. Mark had decided that Emma's disability was the worst part, and he was choosing to walk away from it. But as I lay there in the darkness, something else began to stir inside me. Not just grief and betrayal, but determination. If Mark wanted to abandon his responsibilities, his family, his daughter, then I would show him what real strength looked like. I would raise Emma alone if I had to. I would build a life for us that was full of love, purpose, and joy, even without him. I would prove that a family's worth isn't measured by how normal it appears to others, but by how much love it contains. The woman who had devoted 20 years to her family was about to discover what she was truly capable of when she had to do it all alone. The morning Mark left, I sat at our kitchen table with divorce papers in one hand and Emma's medication schedule in the other, trying to figure out how I was going to manage everything alone. The silence in the house was overwhelming. No sound of Mark's morning routine, no casual conversation over coffee, just the quiet hum of Emma's medical equipment and the weight of complete responsibility settling on my shoulders. Emma sensed something was wrong immediately. Despite her communication challenges, she was incredibly perceptive about emotions and changes in routine. When Mark didn't appear for breakfast, she kept looking toward the door and making the sounds that meant "Daddy" in her limited vocabulary. Daddy had to go away for work, I told her, not ready to explain the full truth. How do you tell your disabled daughter that her father has abandoned her because he wanted a normal life? The first few days were a blur of practical necessities and emotional numbness. I had to rearrange my work schedule at the hospital to ensure Emma was never left alone. I had to figure out how to manage all of her care appointments, therapy sessions, and medical needs without Mark's help. I had to find a lawyer and begin the process of divorce while maintaining some semblance of normalcy for Emma. The financial reality hit me like a sledgehammer. Mark's salary had covered most of our basic expenses, while my nursing income had gone toward Emma's specialized care, equipment, and therapies. Now I had to cover everything on one income, and Emma's needs were only growing more expensive as she got older. I started picking up extra shifts at the hospital, working nights and weekends whenever I could find reliable care for Emma. My sister Lisa helped when she could, but she had her own family and couldn't provide the level of specialized care Emma required. The isolation was crushing. Our social circle had already been limited by Emma's needs. Most of our friends were other families with disabled children, and even those relationships were strained by the demands of caregiving. Now, as a newly single mother with a disabled child, I felt even more isolated from the world of normal families. The worst part was the judgment I felt from others, spoken and unspoken. When people learned that Mark had left, I could see the questions in their eyes. What did you do wrong? Why couldn't you keep your marriage together? How could you let your husband feel so neglected that he had to find someone else? Some people were more direct with their opinions. You put Emma before your marriage, one acquaintance told me. You can't blame Mark for feeling pushed aside. Maybe if you had been more attentive to Mark's needs, another suggested, he wouldn't have strayed. These comments cut deep because part of me wondered if they were right. Had I been so focused on Emma's needs that I had neglected my husband? Had I driven him away with my intensity, my single-minded devotion to our daughter's care? But then I would look at Emma, beautiful, loving Emma who depended on me for everything, and I knew I had made the right choices. She needed advocates, needed people who would fight for her rights and opportunities, needed parents who saw her potential rather than just her limitations. Mark had seen only the burden. I had seen the blessing. The nights were the hardest. After Emma was settled in bed, after her medications were given and her equipment was checked, I would sit alone in the living room and feel the full weight of my new reality. I was 45 years old, a single mother to a disabled child, with no prospects for romance or companionship, because what man would want to take on the challenges of our life? I grieved not just for my marriage, but for the future I had imagined. I had pictured Mark and me growing old together, supporting each other through the challenges of caring for Emma as she aged, celebrating her victories and comforting each other through the difficult times. Instead, I faced the prospect of doing it all alone: the medical appointments, the equipment failures, the insurance battles, the daily care, the emotional support. The responsibility felt overwhelming, and there were nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering how I was going to manage. Emma's routine became my anchor during those dark months. Her needs gave structure to my days, purpose to my exhaustion. When I felt like giving up, I would look at her sweet face and remember why I was fighting so hard. She was making progress in her therapies, learning to use new communication devices, showing more independence in small but meaningful ways. Her joy was infectious. She laughed at silly jokes, loved music and dancing in her wheelchair, and had a mischievous sense of humor that could brighten even my darkest days. But the stress was taking its toll on my health. I was losing weight from forgetting to eat, developing chronic headaches from exhaustion, and struggling with anxiety about our financial future. My supervisor at the hospital noticed the changes and called me into her office. "Karen, I'm worried about you," she said. "You're working too many hours, and you look exhausted. What's going on?" I broke down and told her everything about Mark leaving, about the financial pressure, about feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility of caring for Emma alone. She listened with compassion and then made suggestions that would change everything. "There are resources available for single parents of disabled children," she said. "Support groups, financial assistance programs, respite care services. You don't have to do this alone." She connected me with a social worker who specialized in helping families navigate the complex world of disability services. For the first time since Mark left, I felt like someone understood the challenges I was facing and had practical solutions to offer. The support group was a revelation. I met other single mothers who were raising disabled children, women who had faced similar betrayals and abandonments, but had found ways to build meaningful, joyful lives for themselves and their children. "My ex-husband told me he couldn't handle our son's autism," one woman shared. "He said it was too much stress, too much work. But you know what? We're better off without him. My son doesn't need a father who sees him as a burden." Another woman nodded in agreement. "My daughter has Down syndrome, and my husband left when she was 5. He said he wanted a normal family. Well, we are a normal family. We're just different from what he expected." These women became my lifeline, my reminder that I wasn't alone in this struggle. They shared practical advice about managing care and finances, but more importantly, they showed me that it was possible to thrive as a single parent of a disabled child. Slowly, I began to see my situation differently. Instead of feeling like a victim of Mark's abandonment, I started to feel like a survivor who was building something beautiful from the wreckage of my marriage. Emma and I developed new routines, new traditions, new ways of finding joy in our daily life. We had dance parties in the living room with Emma spinning her wheelchair to the music. We had movie nights with elaborate snack spreads. We took adapted camping trips and visited museums with accessibility programs. I realized that many of the limitations I had felt in our life weren't because of Emma's disability. They were because of Mark's attitude toward that disability. Without his constant negativity and resentment, Emma and I were free to explore possibilities I had never considered. The silence in our house gradually filled with new sounds, laughter, music, the voices of new friends who appreciated Emma for who she was, rather than mourning who she wasn't. 6 months after Mark left, I received a card from him. It was a generic, thinking of you card, with a brief note. Hope you and Emma are doing well. I'm happy in my new life. I read it once, then threw it in the trash. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. He could have his normal life with Jessica. Emma and I would build something better, a life filled with unconditional love, acceptance, and the kind of joy that comes from embracing what you have rather than mourning what you've lost. The shock and silence of those early months had given way to something I hadn't expected, a sense of freedom, of possibility, of strength I didn't know I possessed. I was no longer the woman who had been abandoned by her husband. I was the woman who was building a beautiful life for herself, one day at a time. 8 months after Mark walked out, I made a decision that would change everything. I was sitting in Emma's room, watching her sleep peacefully in her hospital bed, when I realized I had been holding on to something that was poisoning my ability to move forward, the hope that Mark would come back. Despite everything he had done, despite the cruel words and the abandonment, part of me had been waiting for him to realize his mistake. I had been living in a state of suspended animation, not fully committing to my new life because I was still emotionally tied to my old one. That night, I made a conscious choice to let go, not just of Mark, but of the anger, the resentment, the sense of victimhood that had been weighing me down. I decided to stop defining myself as the woman who had been abandoned and start defining myself as the woman who was building something beautiful from the ashes. The first step was practical. I filed the final divorce papers, officially ending our 20-year marriage. I changed my name back to my maiden name and updated all of Emma's medical records to reflect our new status. I sold our house, too big and too full of memories, and found a smaller, more manageable place that was better suited to Emma's needs. The new house was a revelation. It was a single-story ranch with wide doorways, accessible bathrooms, and a beautiful backyard where Emma could enjoy the outdoors safely. For the first time, I was living in a space that was designed around our actual needs rather than conventional expectations. I also made the difficult decision to reduce my hours at the hospital and focus more on Emma's care and my own well-being. The financial sacrifice was significant, but I realized that working myself to exhaustion wasn't sustainable long-term. I needed to find a better balance. Through the support group, I learned about a program that provided respite care for families with disabled children. Trained caregivers would come to our home for a few hours each week, allowing me to run errands, attend appointments, or simply take a break. It was the first time in years that I had regular time to myself. I used that time to rediscover who I was beyond being Emma's caregiver and Mark's ex-wife. I started taking art classes at the community center, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. I joined a book club for single mothers. I began volunteering at a local organization that provided services to families with disabled children. The volunteer work was particularly meaningful. I found that my experience with Emma, combined with my nursing background, made me uniquely qualified to help other families navigate the complex world of disability services. I could offer both practical advice and emotional support based on lived experience. "You really understand what we're going through," one mother told me after I helped her access funding for her son's wheelchair. "Most people try to help, but they don't really get it." I did get it, and that understanding became a source of strength rather than burden. I began to see Emma's disability not as something that had limited our lives, but as something that had given us unique insights and opportunities to help others. I also started dating again, very cautiously at first. The support group had several members who had found love again after their marriages ended, and their stories gave me hope that it was possible to find someone who would accept and love both Emma and me. The first few dates were disasters. Men who seemed interested in me would lose enthusiasm quickly when they learned about Emma's needs. Some were honest about their discomfort with disability. Others simply disappeared after the first mention of my daughter's condition. But I refused to hide Emma or minimize her importance in my life. Any man who couldn't accept her wasn't worthy of either of us. Then I met David at a conference for families with disabled children. He was a single father raising a son with autism, and he understood the challenges and joys of our life in ways that Mark never had. "Emma sounds wonderful," he said when I told her about her. "I'd love to meet her sometime." Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual understanding and shared values. David didn't see Emma as an obstacle to overcome. He saw her as an integral part of who I was, and he was genuinely interested in getting to know her. When I finally introduced them, Emma took to David immediately. He had a gentle way with her, speaking to her directly rather than through me, treating her as a person rather than a patient. Watching them interact, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope for a future that included romantic love alongside my devotion to Emma. The most important change, however, was internal. I stopped apologizing for Emma's needs, stopped feeling guilty about the accommodations our life required, stopped seeing our family as somehow less than normal families. I began to understand that normal was a myth, that every family has challenges and complications, that our love for each other was what made us a family, not our ability to fit conventional expectations. I also stopped waiting for Mark to acknowledge his mistake or express regret for abandoning us. I realized that his approval or remorse was irrelevant to my happiness and Emma's well-being. We were thriving without him, and that was all that mattered. 1 year after Mark left, Emma and I took a vacation to Disney World. It was something I had always wanted to do but had never felt confident about managing alone. The trip was challenging, navigating airports with Emma's equipment, managing her care routine in an unfamiliar environment, dealing with crowds and accessibility issues. But it was also magical. Emma's joy was infectious as she experienced the rides, shows, and characters designed to be accessible to children with disabilities. She laughed until tears streamed down her face, clapped her hands with delight, and made friends with other children who didn't see her wheelchair as anything unusual. On our last night, as we watched the fireworks from our hotel balcony, Emma reached over and took my hand. In her limited vocabulary, she managed to say, "Happy, Mama, happy." In that moment, I realized that letting go of Mark hadn't been a loss. It had been a liberation. We were free to be ourselves, to pursue our own version of happiness, to build a life based on love and acceptance rather than resentment and limitation. The decision to let go had been the beginning of everything beautiful that followed. I was no longer the woman who had been abandoned by her husband. I was the woman who had chosen to build a life of purpose, joy, and unconditional love. And that woman was someone I was proud to be. 2 years after Mark left, I stood in the conference room of the disability advocacy organization where I now worked full-time, presenting our annual report to the board of directors. The numbers were impressive. We had served over 300 families in the past year. Our support programs had expanded to include job training for adults with disabilities, and our advocacy efforts had resulted in improved accessibility standards in our city. But the statistic I was most proud of wasn't on any chart. It was the fact that I had completely rebuilt my life and career around my passion for helping families like mine, and I was thriving in ways I never had before. The transition from nursing to advocacy work had been gradual but transformative. What started as volunteer work had evolved into a part-time position, then a full-time role as family services coordinator. My combination of medical knowledge, personal experience, and genuine empathy made me uniquely effective at helping families navigate the complex systems of disability services. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. Every day, I met with families who were facing the same overwhelming challenges I had navigated with Emma. I could offer them not just professional resources, but genuine understanding of what they were going through. "You really get it," one exhausted mother told me after I had helped her access funding for her daughter's communication device. "Most people try to help, but they don't understand what it's really like to fight for everything your child needs." I did understand, and that understanding had become my superpower. I knew what it felt like to battle insurance companies, to research endless treatment options, to advocate fiercely for your child's rights while maintaining hope in the face of systemic barriers. I had developed a workshop series called Thriving, Not Just Surviving, that had become one of our most popular programs. In these sessions, I taught parents how to advocate effectively for their children while maintaining their own physical and emotional health, how to build support networks, and how to find joy and purpose in the midst of challenging circumstances. Your child's disability doesn't define your family's potential for happiness, I would tell participants. It simply means you'll find happiness in different ways than you originally expected. It was a lesson I had learned through my own experience, and sharing it with others felt like turning my pain into purpose. Emma was thriving too. Now 22, she had aged out of the school system and was participating in a day program that focused on life skills and social activities. She had made friends, learned to use more sophisticated communication technology, and developed a level of independence I hadn't thought possible. She was also my biggest supporter in my new career. Despite her communication challenges, she understood that I was helping other families like ours, and she took pride in being part of that mission. Sometimes she would come to the office with me, and her presence reminded everyone why we did this work. My supervisor told me during my annual review, "Emma is our inspiration. She shows our clients that children with disabilities can grow up to be happy, engaged adults. And you show them that parents can build meaningful lives around their children's needs without sacrificing their own dreams." My relationship with David had also deepened and evolved. We had been together for over a year, and he had become an integral part of Emma's and my life. His son Jake, now 16, had formed a sweet friendship with Emma, treating her like the little sister he'd never had. David understood the demands of raising a child with special needs in ways that Mark never had. He didn't see Emma's care as an inconvenience or obstacle. He saw it as part of loving our family. He learned her routines, helped with her equipment, and advocated for her needs as fiercely as I did. "I love that Emma is part of our relationship," he told me one evening as we watched her and Jake playing an adapted video game together. "She's taught Jake so much about acceptance and compassion. She's made all of us better people." We had started talking about marriage, about officially blending our families. The conversation was complex. We both had children with significant needs, financial considerations, and practical challenges to work through. But we were committed to finding a way to build a life together that honored all of our responsibilities and relationships. The financial rebuilding had been challenging, but ultimately successful. My salary at the advocacy organization was modest compared to what I had earned as a nurse, but it was supplemented by speaking fees from conferences where I shared our story and by consulting work with other organizations developing family support programs. More importantly, I had learned to live within our means and had even managed to start saving for Emma's future. I had established a special needs trust to ensure she would be financially secure throughout her life, regardless of what happened to me. I had also purchased a small house that was perfectly adapted to Emma's needs. It had ramps instead of stairs, a roll-in shower, and wide doorways throughout. The backyard was fenced and safe, with raised garden beds where Emma and I grew vegetables together. The house was filled with photos of our adventures, trips to accessible beaches, visits to museums with special programs for people with disabilities, camping trips in adapted cabins. Our life was full of experiences and memories that Mark had convinced himself were impossible. I had also started writing about our experiences, contributing articles to magazines and websites that focused on disability issues. My writing was honest about the challenges, but also celebratory of the joys and victories that came with raising a child with special needs. One article in particular had gone viral, a piece titled "The Gift of Different" that challenged common assumptions about disability and family happiness. I had written it in response to well-meaning people who told me they didn't know how I did it, or said they couldn't handle what I was dealing with. You could handle it, I had written, because when it's your child, when it's your family, you find strength you didn't know you had. And you discover that different doesn't mean less than, it just means different. The response to the article was overwhelming. I received hundreds of emails from parents, siblings, and adults with disabilities who felt seen and understood by my words. Several publishers reached out about expanding the piece into a book. The most significant change, however, was internal. I had developed an unshakable confidence in my choices and my worth. I no longer questioned whether I had done the right thing by prioritizing Emma's needs. I no longer wondered if I could have saved my marriage by being different. I knew that Mark's inability to see the beauty and value in our life said nothing about our worth and everything about his character. I knew that Emma was a blessing, not a burden, and that any man who couldn't see that wasn't worthy of either of us. This new confidence had been tested when Mark reached out to me about 6 months earlier. He had called my office asking if we could meet to discuss Emma's future. I had agreed, curious about what he wanted after 3 years of no contact. He looked older when we met, and there was something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Regret, perhaps, or uncertainty? Jessica wasn't with him, and when I asked about her, his expression darkened. "We broke up," he admitted. "Turns out she wasn't as understanding about my past as I thought she'd be. When she learned about Emma, about the financial obligations, she decided she didn't want to deal with the complications." I felt a moment of vindication. The woman he had left us for had ultimately rejected him for the same reasons he had rejected us. But mostly, I felt sorry for him. Sorry that he had thrown away a family that loved him for a fantasy that couldn't survive reality. "I've been thinking about Emma a lot," he continued, "about what I've missed, what I gave up. I wonder if I could start seeing her again, maybe build a relationship with her." I studied his face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or growth. What I saw was a man who was lonely and regretful, but I wasn't sure he had truly changed his fundamental attitude toward Emma's disability. "Mark, Emma is doing beautifully," I said carefully. "She's happy, healthy, and surrounded by people who love and accept her completely. If you want to be part of her life, you need to understand that she comes as she is. There's no fixing her, no making her normal. There's only loving her for who she is." "I understand that now," he said. "I was wrong before. I was selfish and scared, and I made terrible choices, but I've learned from my mistakes." I wanted to believe him, but I also knew that Emma's well-being had to come first. If you're serious about this, you'll need to start slowly. Maybe some supervised visits, some time to get reacquainted. But Emma's routine and stability are my priority. I won't let anyone disrupt the life we've built. He agreed to my conditions, and over the following months, he began visiting Emma regularly. The relationship was tentative and sometimes awkward, but Emma seemed happy to see him. She had always been forgiving and accepting, qualities that both humbled and inspired me. I remained cautious but hopeful. Whether or not Mark could truly change, Emma deserved the chance to have a relationship with her father if that's what she wanted. As I reflected on the rebuilding process, I realized that it hadn't just been about recovering from Mark's abandonment. It had been about discovering who I was meant to be. The woman who had emerged from that crisis was stronger, more purposeful, and more authentic than the woman who had been devastated by her husband's betrayal. I had rebuilt from scratch, but what I had built was better than what I had lost. I had created a life of meaning, impact, and joy that no one could take away from me. 5 years after Mark walked out of our lives, I stood at the podium of a national conference on disability rights, looking out at an audience of 1,200 advocates, families, and professionals who had come to hear me deliver the keynote address. The woman who had once felt worthless and abandoned was now a nationally recognized expert on family resilience and disability advocacy. My book, The Gift of Different, Finding Joy and Purpose in Unexpected Places, had been published 8 months earlier and was already in its fourth printing. The New York Times had called it a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit and the transformative power of unconditional love. The speaking engagements had grown from local support groups to national conferences, from small workshops to keynote addresses at major universities. Today's presentation was for the National Association of Disability Advocates, and my topic was Redefining Normal: How Families Thrive When They Embrace Their Unique Journey. How many of you have been told that your family isn't normal? I asked the audience. Nearly every hand in the room went up. How many of you have been made to feel that your child's disability is a tragedy that defines your family's potential for happiness? About 3/4 of the hands remained raised. And how many of you have discovered that your definition of normal was too narrow, that your family's journey has brought gifts you never expected? This time, most hands went up, accompanied by knowing smiles and nods. I spent the next hour sharing not just my personal story, but the research and insights I had developed through my work with hundreds of families. I talked about the myth of normal, the importance of building support communities, and the possibility of finding profound meaning and joy in unexpected places. The response was overwhelming. During the Q&A session, person after person stood up to share their own stories of transformation, of finding strength they didn't know they had, of discovering that their child's disability had led them to purposes and communities they never would have found otherwise. After the presentation, I was surrounded by people wanting to connect, to share their stories, to ask for advice. It was exhausting but exhilarating. This was why I did this work, why I had turned my personal experience into a platform for helping others. My professional life had expanded far beyond the local advocacy organization where I had started. I now served on the boards of 3 national organizations, consulted with hospitals and schools on developing inclusive programs, and had been invited to contribute to major research studies on family resilience and post-traumatic growth. The financial success had been unexpected but welcome. Between my salary, speaking fees, book royalties, and consulting work, I was earning more than I ever had as a nurse. More importantly, every dollar I earned came from work that felt meaningful and aligned with my values. Emma, now 25, had become an integral part of my advocacy work. Despite her communication challenges, she had a powerful presence that reminded audiences why this work mattered. She often accompanied me to conferences, and her joy and resilience inspired everyone she met. She had also achieved a level of independence that exceeded everyone's expectations. She lived in a supported living facility during the week, participating in job training programs and social activities, and came home on weekends. She had friends, hobbies, and a sense of purpose that filled me with pride. Emma is proof that people with disabilities can live full, meaningful lives when they're given the right support and opportunities, I often told audiences. She's not inspiring because she's overcome her disability. She's inspiring because she's living authentically as herself. My relationship with David had culminated in marriage 2 years earlier. Our wedding was a celebration of blended families, with Emma as my maid of honor and Jake as David's best man. Both children had played active roles in planning the ceremony, which was held in the accessible garden of the Disability Center where I worked. I love that our family was built on choice rather than obligation, David said in his vows. We chose each other, we chose to blend our families, and we choose every day to support each other's dreams and challenges. Our marriage was everything my first marriage hadn't been, built on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep understanding of what really mattered in life. David didn't just tolerate Emma's needs, he embraced them as part of loving our family. We had purchased a larger house that could accommodate both children's needs, with accessible features throughout and space for the equipment and adaptations that made independent living possible. The house had become a gathering place for other families in our community, hosting support group meetings and social events. I had also reconnected with old friends and made many new ones through my work and advocacy. Our social circle was diverse and inclusive, filled with people who understood that families come in many different forms, and love is what makes a family strong. The relationship with Mark had evolved into something I never expected, a functional co-parenting arrangement that prioritized Emma's well-being above all else. After months of supervised visits, he had gradually rebuilt a relationship with Emma that, while different from what it had been, was genuine and caring. He had also remarried to a woman who worked with children with disabilities and understood the realities of our family's life. I was genuinely happy for him, glad that he had found someone who could accept all aspects of his life, including his daughter with special needs. I was wrong about everything, he had told me during one of our conversations about Emma's care. I thought her disability would limit our happiness, but I see now that my attitude was the only thing limiting us. You and Emma have built something beautiful, and I'm grateful to be part of it again, even in a small way. His acknowledgement felt good, but it wasn't necessary for my peace of mind. I had long since stopped needing his validation to know that I had made the right choices. The most rewarding aspect of my new life was the impact I was having on other families. Through my work, my writing, and my speaking, I was helping people navigate some of the most challenging experiences of their lives while finding meaning and purpose in those challenges. I received emails regularly from parents who had heard me speak or read my book, telling me how my story had changed their perspective on their own family's journey. One email in particular had moved me to tears. It was from a mother whose son had been born with Down syndrome and whose husband had initially struggled to accept the diagnosis. "Your book saved our marriage," she wrote. "My husband read it and realized that his attitude was the problem, not our son's disability. He's now one of our son's biggest advocates, and our family is stronger than ever. Thank you for showing us that different can be beautiful." That email reminded me why I had chosen to share my story publicly, despite the vulnerability it required. If my experience could help even one family avoid the pain of rejection and abandonment, or help them find strength and purpose in their challenges, then every moment of my own struggle had been worthwhile. As I flew home from the conference, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me to this point. 5 years ago, I had been a broken woman who felt abandoned and worthless. Today, I was a successful advocate, a published author, a sought-after speaker, and most importantly, a person who knew her own value. The new beginning I had created wasn't just about professional success or personal fulfillment, though those were important. It was about discovering who I was when I stopped apologizing for my family's needs, when I stopped trying to fit into other people's definitions of normal, when I started building a life based on my own values and dreams. I had learned that I was stronger than I ever imagined, more capable than I had been credited for, and more deserving of love and respect than I had believed. I had learned that betrayal, while painful, didn't have to be the end of the story. It could be the beginning of something even better. The woman who had been abandoned for wanting a normal life had discovered that normal was overrated. What mattered was love, acceptance, purpose, and the courage to build a life that honored your values rather than other people's expectations. This was my new beginning, and it was more beautiful than anything I had lost. 7 years after Mark had walked out of our lives, I was leaving a conference in downtown Chicago when I spotted a familiar figure sitting alone in the hotel lobby. It took me a moment to recognize him. Mark looked older, grayer, and somehow smaller than I remembered. He was staring at his phone with an expression of profound sadness. I hesitated, debating whether to approach him or simply walk past. We had maintained a cordial relationship for Emma's sake, but our interactions were limited to scheduled visits and necessary communications about her care. This felt different, more personal, more vulnerable. Something about his posture, the slump of his shoulders, the way he seemed lost in a crowded space made me walk over to him. "Mark, are you okay?" He looked up, startled, and I saw that his eyes were red-rimmed, as if he had been crying. "Karen, I didn't know you were in Chicago." "I was speaking at a conference," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "What brings you here?" His face crumpled slightly. "Medical appointments at Northwestern. I've been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's." The words hit me like a physical blow. Whatever issues we had between us, whatever pain he had caused, this was devastating news. "Mark, I'm so sorry. How long have you known?" "6 months," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I started having memory problems, getting confused about things that should have been simple. Sarah, my wife, she insisted I get tested." I knew about Sarah, the special education teacher he had married 3 years earlier. She seemed like a good person, someone who understood the complexities of caring for people with special needs. "How was Sarah handling it?" I asked. His expression darkened. "She left last month. Said she couldn't handle watching me deteriorate, couldn't commit to being a caregiver for someone with dementia. She said she was too young to throw her life away on a disease that would only get worse." The irony was staggering and heartbreaking. Mark, who had left me because he couldn't handle the challenges of caring for Emma, had now been abandoned by someone who couldn't handle the challenges of caring for him. "I'm so sorry," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything that had happened between us, I felt genuine compassion for the fear and loneliness he must be experiencing. "The worst part," he continued, tears streaming down his face, "is that I finally understand what I put you through. I finally understand what it feels like to be abandoned by someone who promised to love you through everything. I finally understand what it means to have someone see you as a burden rather than a person worthy of love." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between us. I could see the regret and self-awareness in his eyes, the painful recognition of how his past actions had come full circle. "Does Emma know?" I asked. "Not yet. I wanted to tell her in person, but I'm scared. I'm scared she'll be afraid of me, scared of what I'm becoming. I'm scared she won't understand." "Emma understands more than you think," I said gently. "She understands love, and she understands that people need care sometimes. She won't judge you for being sick." "How do you do it?" he asked suddenly. "How do you stay so strong, so positive, when everything is falling apart?" I considered his question carefully. "I learned that strength isn't about avoiding difficult situations. It's about finding meaning in them. I learned that love isn't conditional on someone being easy to care for. And I learned that my worth isn't determined by other people's ability to appreciate what I give." "I was such a fool," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I had everything: a wife who loved me unconditionally, a daughter who brought joy to our lives despite her challenges, a family that was built on real love. And I threw it all away because I was selfish and scared." "You were human," I said. "You made mistakes, but you've learned from them. That's what matters now." "But it's too late. I can't undo the damage I did. I can't get back the years I lost with Emma. And now, with this disease, I'm going to lose even more." I reached across the table and took his hand. "It's not too late to be the father Emma needs now. It's not too late to show her that you love her, that you're proud of her, that you want to be part of her life for whatever time you have left." "Will you help me?" he asked. Will you help me figure out how to tell her how to maintain a relationship with her as this disease progresses? I thought about his request. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect Emma and myself from the pain of watching Mark deteriorate. But another part of me recognized an opportunity for healing, for closure, for Emma to have meaningful time with her father before it was too late. "I'll help," I said, "but we do this Emma's way, at Emma's pace. Her well-being comes first, always." "Of course," he said quickly. "I just want whatever time with her I can have. I want to make up for some of the years I lost." Over the following months, we worked together to help Emma understand Mark's diagnosis and what it would mean for their relationship. True to form, Emma approached the situation with grace and acceptance that humbled both of us. She didn't judge Mark for being sick, didn't pull away from him because his condition was progressive and frightening. Instead, she adapted to his changing needs the same way she had always adapted to her own challenges, with patience, creativity, and unconditional love. Mark began visiting more frequently, and I watched as he discovered aspects of Emma's personality and capabilities that he had missed during his years of absence. He marveled at her sense of humor, her artistic abilities, her capacity for joy despite her physical limitations. "She's amazing," he told me after one visit where Emma had shown him a painting she had created using adaptive tools. "I can't believe I ever saw her as anything other than a blessing." As Mark's condition progressed, the visits became more challenging, but also more precious. Emma seemed to understand that their time together was limited, and she approached each interaction with intentionality and love. She would play his favorite music, show him photos from her activities, and simply sit with him when words became difficult. Her presence seemed to calm him during moments of confusion, and her acceptance of his changing abilities gave him dignity in the face of a devastating disease. "She's teaching me how to live with grace," he told me during one of our conversations. "She's showing me that worth isn't about what you can do, it's about who you are and how you love." The encounter in that hotel lobby had led to something I never expected, a period of healing and reconciliation that benefited everyone involved. Mark got to experience the joy of truly knowing his daughter before his disease progressed too far. Emma got to have meaningful time with her father, creating memories that would sustain her after he was gone. And I got to witness the power of forgiveness and second chances, the possibility of finding meaning and connection even in the midst of tragedy. Mark's diagnosis was devastating, but it had also created an opportunity for our family to come full circle, not back to where we started, but to a place of understanding, acceptance, and love that we had never achieved before. The encounter reminded me that life is unpredictable, that the people who hurt us are often struggling with their own pain and limitations, and that it's possible to find grace and healing even in the most difficult circumstances. It also reminded me of how far I had traveled from the broken woman Mark had left behind. I was now strong enough to offer compassion without sacrificing my boundaries, wise enough to help without losing myself, and secure enough in my own worth to extend grace to someone who had once rejected everything I offered. The encounter was a gift, not because it erased the past, but because it allowed us to write a different ending to our story, one based on love and understanding rather than abandonment and regret. 10 years had passed since Mark walked out of our lives, and I was sitting in Emma's room at the memory care facility, holding his father's hand as he slept peacefully. The man who had once abandoned us because he couldn't handle our abnormal life was now completely dependent on others for his care, and Emma and I had become his primary advocates and visitors. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it no longer felt bitter. Instead, it felt like a completion of some cosmic circle, a chance for our family to demonstrate the kind of unconditional love that Mark had once been unable to give. Mark's Alzheimer's had progressed rapidly over the past 3 years. The man who had once been articulate and decisive now struggled to remember our names, to recognize familiar faces, to perform basic tasks. But in his moments of clarity, he expressed gratitude for our presence and regret for the years he had lost. "I don't deserve this," he had told me during one of his lucid moments. "I don't deserve your kindness, Emma's love, your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it every day." "Your family," I had replied simply. "This is what family does." Emma had been remarkable throughout Mark's decline. Despite her own communication challenges, she seemed to understand his confusion and fear in ways that amazed the medical staff. She would sit with him for hours, holding his hand, playing music, or simply being present when words failed both of them. "She has a gift," one of the nurses told me. "She calms him in ways that medication can't. It's like she understands what he needs before he knows it himself." I wasn't surprised. Emma had always been intuitive about people's emotions and needs. Her disability had never diminished her capacity for empathy and love. If anything, it had enhanced it. My own relationship with Mark during this period had been complex but healing. Caring for him alongside Emma had given me a different perspective on our shared history. I could see now that his abandonment of us hadn't been about cruelty or callousness. It had been about fear, immaturity, and an inability to see beyond his own limitations. That understanding didn't excuse his actions, but it allowed me to approach his current situation with compassion rather than resentment. I wasn't caring for him out of obligation or guilt. I was caring for him because it was the right thing to do, and because Emma deserved to have her father's final years filled with love rather than abandonment. David had been incredibly supportive throughout this process. He understood that my commitment to Mark's care wasn't about lingering romantic feelings. It was about family, forgiveness, and the values we had built our marriage on. "This is who you are," he told me when I worried that the time I spent with Mark was taking away from our family. "This is why I fell in love with you, because you see people's worth even when they can't see it themselves." My professional life had continued to flourish during this period. My second book, Circles of Care: How Families Heal Through Service, had been inspired partly by our experience with Mark's illness. It explored how caring for others, even those who had hurt us, could become a path to healing and growth. The book had resonated with readers who were struggling with similar situations: adult children caring for parents who had been absent or abusive, spouses caring for ex-partners who had abandoned them, families finding ways to love despite past betrayals. "Your story gave me permission to care for my father, even though he left us when I was young," one reader wrote. "I realized that forgiveness isn't about what he deserves, it's about who I want to be." I had also been invited to speak at medical schools and nursing programs about the intersection of personal experience and professional caregiving. My unique perspective, as someone who had been both abandoned by a patient and later became an advocate for that same patient, offered insights that purely academic approaches couldn't provide. Emma, now 28, had become a powerful advocate in her own right. Despite her communication challenges, she had learned to use technology to share her experiences and perspectives. Her blog, Different and Proud, had gained a following among people with disabilities and their families. She wrote about her relationship with Mark, about forgiveness and family, about the importance of seeing people's worth beyond their abilities or limitations. Her words were simple but profound, touching hearts and changing minds about what it meant to live with disability. "My dad left because he was scared," she had written in one post, "but he came back because he learned love is stronger than fear. Now I take care of him like he should have taken care of me. That's what love does." The post had gone viral, shared by thousands of people who were moved by Emma's wisdom and grace. She had been invited to speak at conferences, to share her story with audiences who needed to hear that forgiveness was possible, that families could heal even after devastating betrayals. As I sat in Mark's room that day, watching Emma gently brush his hair while he slept, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought us to this point. 10 years ago, I had been a broken woman who felt worthless and abandoned. Today, I was a successful advocate, a published author, a loving wife, and most importantly, a person who had learned that strength comes not from avoiding difficult situations, but from finding meaning and purpose in them. Emma had grown from a child whose father saw her as a burden into a young woman who understood that everyone deserves love and care, regardless of their limitations. She had become a teacher, showing others that disability doesn't diminish a person's capacity for wisdom, compassion, and grace. And Mark, in his final years, had learned what unconditional love looked like. He had experienced the kind of care and devotion he had once been unable to give, and in his lucid moments, he expressed wonder at the grace he was receiving. "I understand now," he had told me just the week before. "I understand what you were trying to teach me all those years ago. Love isn't about what someone can do for you. It's about who they are and how much they mean to you." The circle was complete, but it had led us to a place of wisdom, compassion, and understanding that we never could have reached without the journey through betrayal, abandonment, and eventual reconciliation. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't about excusing someone's behavior. It was about freeing yourself from the burden of resentment. I had learned that caring for others, even those who had hurt us, could become a source of healing and growth. And I had learned that families could be rebuilt on stronger foundations after they had been broken. Emma had learned that her worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to see it, that her love had the power to heal even the deepest wounds, and that forgiveness was a gift she could give without diminishing herself. Mark had learned, perhaps too late but not too late to matter, that love was the only thing that truly counted, that his daughter was a blessing rather than a burden, and that the family he had abandoned was the greatest treasure he had ever possessed. As the sun set outside Mark's window, casting a golden glow over the room where 3 generations of our family sat together, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had come full circle, but to a much better place than where we had started. The woman who had been abandoned for wanting a normal life had discovered that normal was overrated. What mattered was love, forgiveness, and the courage to keep your heart open even after it had been broken. The circle was complete, and we were all exactly where we needed to be. As I write these final words, 15 years have passed since the day Mark told me he wanted a normal life and walked out on Emma and me. I am now 58 years old, and I can say with absolute certainty that these have been the most meaningful and fulfilling years of my life. Mark passed away peacefully 6 months ago, surrounded by Emma, David, and me. His final words were, "Thank you for showing me what love really means." In his last years, he had experienced the kind of unconditional care and devotion he had once been unable to give. And it had transformed his understanding of what family truly meant. Emma, now 29, has become a nationally recognized advocate for people with disabilities. Her book, Love Without Limits, A Daughter's Journey of Forgiveness, has inspired thousands of families dealing with similar challenges. She speaks regularly at conferences, sharing her wisdom about acceptance, forgiveness, and the power of unconditional love. Despite her communication challenges, Emma's message is crystal clear. Every person has worth, every family can heal, and love is always stronger than fear. My own work continues to evolve and expand. I recently established a foundation that provides support to families affected by both disability and abandonment. a combination of challenges that is more common than most people realize. The foundation offers counseling, financial assistance, and advocacy services to help families rebuild after betrayal. David and I celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary last month. Our marriage has been tested by the challenges of caring for Mark, supporting Emma's growing independence, and managing our own complex family dynamics. But it has emerged stronger because it's built on shared values, mutual respect, and a deep understanding of what really matters in life. We have also become foster parents to children with special needs, providing temporary homes for kids whose families are in crisis. It's challenging work, but it's also incredibly rewarding. We've learned that love multiplies when it's shared, and that every child deserves to know they are valued and wanted. But beyond all the professional success and personal fulfillment, the most important transformation has been internal. I have learned that my worth was never determined by Mark's ability to appreciate what I gave. My value was never dependent on his gratitude or recognition. I am enough, exactly as I am, with all my imperfections and limitations. To every woman who has sacrificed everything for her family, only to be told she wasn't enough, I want you to know that their inability to see your worth says nothing about your value and everything about their limitations. To every parent of a child with special needs who has been abandoned by a partner who couldn't handle the challenges, I want you to know that you are strong than you realize, more capable than you believe, and more deserving of love and support than you've been taught to think. To every caregiver who has lost themselves in the process of caring for others, I want you to know that it's possible to maintain your identity while serving others, to find purpose in sacrifice without sacrificing your sense of self. The journey from abandonment to advocacy, from betrayal to healing, from brokenness to wholeness is not easy. There will be days when you want to give up, when the pain feels overwhelming, when you can't imagine ever feeling joy again. But I promise you this, if you keep moving forward, if you refuse to let someone else's rejection define your worth, if you have the courage to build a life based on your own values rather than other people's expectations, you will discover strengths you never knew you had. You will find that you are more resilient than you imagined, more capable than you believed, more deserving of love and respect than you were taught to think. You will discover that the person who emerges from the ashes of betrayal is often stronger, wiser, and more authentic than the person who was destroyed. I am not the same woman who stood in that kitchen 15 years ago, listening to her husband tell her he wanted a normal life without his disabled daughter. That woman was defined by other people's needs, other people's approval, other people's definitions of worth and success. The woman I am today knows that normal is a myth, that every family has challenges, that love is what makes a family strong, not the absence of difficulties. I know that my daughter's disability was never a burden. It was a gift that taught us about unconditional love, about finding joy in unexpected places, about the strength of the human spirit. I have learned that forgiveness is not about excusing someone else's behavior. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of resentment. I have learned that caring for others, even those who have hurt us, can become a path to healing and growth. And I have learned that families can be rebuilt on stronger foundations after they have been broken. Most importantly, I have learned that betrayal, while painful, is not the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a better chapter if you have the courage to write it. The woman who was abandoned for wanting a normal life discovered that her life was already perfect, not because it was easy, but because it was filled with love, purpose, and meaning. The woman who was told her disabled daughter was a burden learned that Emma was actually a blessing who taught everyone around her about grace, acceptance, and the power of unconditional love. I have learned that forgiveness is not about excusing someone else's behavior. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of resentment. I have learned that caring for others, even those who have hurt us, can become a path to healing and growth. And I have learned that families can be rebuilt on stronger foundations after they have been broken. Most importantly, I have learned that betrayal, while painful, is not the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a better chapter if you have the courage to write it. The woman who was abandoned for wanting a normal life discovered that her life was already perfect, not because it was easy, but because it was filled with love, purpose, and meaning. The woman who was told her disabled daughter was a burden learned that Emma was actually a blessing who taught everyone around her about grace, acceptance, and the power of unconditional love. If my story has touched you, if it has given you hope or courage, or simply reminded you that you are not alone, then every moment of pain I endured was worthwhile. We are all stronger than we know, more resilient than we believe, and more deserving of love and happiness than we have been taught to think. Your story is not over. Your best chapters may still be ahead of you. The challenges you face today may become the foundation for the purpose you discover tomorrow. Emma taught me that different doesn't mean less than, it just means different. Mark taught me that people can change, that it's never too late for redemption, that forgiveness is possible even after devastating betrayal. David taught me that love can be rebuilt on stronger foundations, that partnership is possible even in the midst of complex challenges. And life has taught me that every experience, no matter how painful, can become a source of wisdom, strength, and service to others. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing my worth, for celebrating my journey, for believing in the power of resilience and renewal. Thank you for understanding that families come in many forms. That love is what makes us strong, and that every person, regardless of their abilities or limitations, deserves to be valued and cherished. Now, go write your own beautiful story. Embrace your unique journey. Love without limits. And remember, you are enough, exactly as you are. You have always been enough.